I never loved you, Marcus. I was just waiting for something better to come along. Those words echoed through the kitchen of our modest Detroit home like a shotgun blast. The coffee mug I was holding slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the worn linoleum floor I'd promised to replace 3 years ago, but never had the money for. Sarah stood there, positioned in front of our scratched refrigerator, wearing that red dress I'd bought her last Christmas, working double shifts at the Ford plant to pay for it. Her eyes, once my sanctuary, now pierced through me with a coldness I'd never seen before. What? The word came out of my throat like a hoarse whimper. My knees buckled, and I gripped the wooden table I'd built with my own hands when we got married 8 years ago. You heard me right. She crossed her arms, and I swear I saw a cruel smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I've been seeing Richard for 6 months. He owns 3 car dealerships, Marcus. Bree. You can barely afford to keep the lights on. The fluorescent light above us flickered, a constant reminder of our financial struggles. I'd been meaning to fix it for months, but between working 16-hour days and weekend shifts, there was never time. Never money for an electrician. 6 months. My voice cracked like I was 13 again. Sarah, I've been killing myself to provide for us. The overtime, the night shifts. Provide. She let out a bitter laugh that cut through me like broken glass. Look around, Marcus. Look at this place. The peeling wallpaper, the leaky faucet you've been going to fix for 2 years, the car that breaks down every other week. This isn't providing. This is barely surviving. I glanced around our kitchen, really looked at it for the first time in months. The cabinet doors hung slightly crooked. The countertop had water stains I'd stopped noticing. The window above the sink had a crack running through it that I'd covered with duct tape last winter. When had I stopped seeing it? When had I become so numb to our circumstances? I work 70 hours a week, I whispered, more to myself than to her. I haven't taken a day off in 8 months. I gave up my dream of going back to school so you could finish your nursing degree. And what did that get us? She gestured wildly around the room. What did any of your sacrifices actually accomplish, Marcus? We're still broke. We're still living paycheck to paycheck. We're still... Nothing. Nothing. The word hit me like a physical blow. I thought about the mornings I'd left the house at 5 a.m., my hands already aching before the day began. The evenings I'd come home so exhausted I could barely form sentences. The weekends I'd spent doing odd jobs for neighbors, fixing their plumbing, painting their houses, anything to scrape together a few extra dollars. Also she could focus on her studies. Also she could have a better life. Richard took me to Chicago last weekend, she said, examining her manicured nails. Nails I didn't remember her having yesterday. We stayed at the Palmer House. Do you know what a suite there costs per night? More than you make in a month. My stomach churned. Last weekend. You said you were studying at Jennifer's house. I lied. She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. I've been lying for months, Marcus. It's easier than dealing with this. She waved her hand dismissively at me. The room started spinning. I gripped the table tighter, feeling the rough wood I'd sanded with my own hands, stained with my own sweat. I remembered the day I'd made it, how proud I'd been to give Sarah something beautiful, something permanent. He's picking me up in an hour, she continued, checking her phone. I'm moving in with him. His house in Grosse Pointe has 6 bedrooms and a 3-car garage. There's a maid who comes twice a week. Sarah, please. I reached out toward her, but she stepped back like I was diseased. We can work this out. I can get a better job, we can. With what qualifications, Marcus? You're a high school graduate who works in a factory. Richard has an MBA from Northwestern. He drives a Tesla. He has season tickets to the Lions and the Pistons. He can give me the life I deserve. The life she deserved. As if I hadn't been trying to give her exactly that for 8 years. What about our vows? My voice was barely a whisper now. For better or worse, for richer or poorer. Those were words, Marcus. Just words. She picked up her purse from the counter, A designer bag I'd never seen before. I'm 32 years old. I'm not going to waste the rest of my life being poor. I watched her walk toward the hallway, her heels clicking against the floor with a finality that made my chest tighten. At the doorway, she paused and turned back. I'll send someone for my things next week. Don't try to contact me. Sarah, I love you. The words came out broken, desperate. She looked at me for a long moment, and for just a second I thought I saw something, regret maybe. But then her expression hardened again. Love doesn't pay the bills, Marcus. And it certainly doesn't buy respect. The front door slammed 20 minutes later, and I was alone. I stood in that kitchen for hours after she left, staring at the broken coffee mug on the floor, the brown liquid seeping into the cracks between the linoleum tiles. The house creaked around me, settling into its emptiness. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Patterson's dog barking, the Johnson kids playing street hockey, the distant hum of traffic on 8 Mile Road. Life going on as if mine hadn't just imploded. Years. 8 years of 16-hour days, of choosing between groceries and electricity, of wearing the same 3 shirts to work because I couldn't afford new ones. 8 years of believing that sacrifice meant something, that love could overcome anything. I was 41 years old, and I had nothing to show for it but calloused hands and a broken heart. The worst part. Looking back now, I could see the signs. The way she'd started caring more about her appearance. The mysterious phone calls. The sudden interest in expensive restaurants and designer clothes. The growing distance between us. I'd been so busy working, so focused on trying to provide, that I'd missed my own wife falling out of love with me. Or maybe she'd never been in love with me at all. As I finally bent down to clean up the shattered mug, one thought kept echoing in my mind. How do you rebuild a life from nothing when you're already middle-aged? I had no idea that the answer would come in the form of a certified letter that would arrive exactly 1 week later. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. Expensive paper, the kind I'd never held before. The return address read, Whitmore, Sterling and Associates, Attorneys at Law, in embossed gold lettering. My name was written in elegant script across the front. Mr. Marcus Daniel Westbrook. I'd been living on instant ramen and day-old bread for the past week. The silence in the house so complete it felt like a tomb. Sarah's absence echoed in every room. The empty closet, the missing toiletries, the single plate I now used for every meal. Probably divorce papers, I muttered, but something about the formal weight of the envelope told me otherwise. I tore it open with trembling fingers. Dear Mr. Westbrook, we regret to inform you of the passing of your great-uncle, Theodore Westbrook, on October 15, 2024. As per his last will and testament, you have been named as the sole beneficiary of his estate. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the inheritance, which includes liquid assets totaling $847 million, real estate holdings valued at $312 million, and various business interests. Our sincere condolences for your loss. Respectfully, Jonathan Sterling Esq. The letter fluttered from my numb fingers like a dying bird. $847 million. I read the number again. And again. My legs gave out, and I collapsed into the worn recliner that Sarah had always hated. Called it, that ugly brown thing. For the first time in a week, I was grateful she wasn't here to see me fall apart. Theodore Westbrook. The name stirred something in the depths of my childhood memories. My grandmother had mentioned him once years ago, during one of her rambling stories about family members who'd made something of themselves. I remembered her saying he'd gone to California in the 60s and never looked back. Too good for the rest of us, she'd said with that bitter edge she reserved for family who'd escaped Detroit. I'd never met the man. Never even knew he was still alive. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hope you're enjoying your poverty, loser. Richard just bought me a Porsche. Sarah. She'd blocked me on everything else, but apparently couldn't resist one final twist of the knife. I stared at her message, then at the letter on the floor, then back at the message. A laugh started building in my chest. Not joy, but something darker, more primal. It bubbled up through 8 years of suppressed frustration, of swallowed pride, of choosing silence over confrontation because I believed keeping peace was more important than keeping dignity. The laugh exploded out of me, echoing through the empty house like a battle cry. 3 hours later, I was sitting in the mahogany-paneled office of Whitmore, Sterling and Associates in downtown Detroit, feeling like an imposter in my only good shirt, the one I'd worn to job interviews that never led anywhere. Jonathan Sterling was exactly what central casting would order for a high-end attorney. Silver hair, tailored suit, and the kind of confidence that comes from never worrying about money. He slid a leather portfolio across his massive desk. "Your great-uncle was quite specific in his instructions, Mr. Westbrook," Sterling said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "He'd been following your life from a distance. Apparently, he was impressed by your work ethic and character. He was watching me." Theodore made it his business to know about family members, even those he'd never met. "He particularly noted your dedication to your wife's education, your sacrifice of personal advancement for her benefit." Sterling's expression grew somber. "I'm afraid he also knew about recent developments in your marriage." Heat crept up my neck. How could he possibly know about Sarah? Theodore had resources, Mr. Westbrook. In contacts. He was quite distressed to learn of your wife's infidelity. Sterling opened the portfolio. Which brings us to a rather unusual clause in his will. My heart hammered against my ribs. He's left instructions for what he calls the unveiling. He wants you to reveal your inheritance to your ex-wife and her new companion in a very specific manner. Sterling's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. Your great-uncle had quite the sense of drama. I leaned forward. What kind of specific manner? Sterling produced an envelope sealed with red wax. "These are his exact instructions. You're to follow them to the letter, or forfeit the inheritance entirely." The envelope felt warm in my hands, as if it contained something alive. "There's also this." Sterling handed me a black credit card. "American Express Centurion. No spending limit. Consider it operational funding for what's to come." I stared at the card. Matte black metal, heavier than it looked. I'd heard about these cards but never imagined holding one. The kind of financial instrument that Sarah had dreamed about, that Richard probably carried in his wallet like a talisman. "Mr. Westbrook," Sterling continued, "your great-uncle spent 40 years building his fortune, but he also spent 40 years regretting his estrangement from family. He saw in you someone who'd been undervalued, taken for granted. He wants to give you the tools not just to recover from your recent loss, but to become the man you were always capable of being." I broke the wax seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the letter inside. Theodore's handwriting was bold, confident. "Marcus, by now you know about Sarah's betrayal. Sorry, boy. I know that pain. My own wife left me for a rich man in 1967. The difference is, I had nothing to lose then except my pride. You're about to have everything to gain. Here's what you're going to do." I read the instructions twice, my eyes widening with each paragraph. Theodore had thought of everything. Timing, location, even what I should wear. "This is..." I looked up at Sterling. "This is elaborate. Your great-uncle was known for his theatrical flair. He once bought an entire hotel just to fire the manager who'd been rude to him." Sterling's smile was sharp. "I take it you'll be following his instructions." I thought about Sarah's text message. About Richard's 3 dealerships and his season tickets. About 8 years of sacrifice that had been dismissed as nothing. About the look in Sarah's eyes when she'd called me nothing. "Every single word," I said. Sterling nodded approvingly. "Excellent. You have 3 weeks to prepare. Theodore's instructions specify that you're to undergo what he calls the transformation before the unveiling. New wardrobe, personal trainer, etiquette coach. Everything needed to become the man your wife never saw coming." He handed me another card. "Marcus Romano, personal shopper to Detroit's elite. He's expecting your call." I left that office feeling like I was walking through a dream. The black credit card felt like it was burning a hole in my wallet. $847 million. The number kept rotating through my mind like a slot machine jackpot. But it wasn't the money that had my pulse racing. It was the look I was going to see in Sarah's eyes when she realized exactly what she'd walked away from. For 8 years, I'd been the man who wasn't enough. The husband who couldn't provide the life she wanted. The failure who drove a 15-year-old pickup truck and bought her discount jewelry. In 3 weeks I was going to show her, and Richard, exactly what enough looked like. As I walked back to my beaten-up Ford in the parking garage, I pulled out my phone and typed a response to Sarah's text. Enjoy the Porsche. I got some shopping to do myself. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The transformation was about to begin. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirrors in my new penthouse at the Renaissance Center, barely recognizing the man staring back at me. Gone was the exhausted factory worker in worn flannel shirts. In his place stood someone who looked like he belonged on the cover of Fortune magazine. The Italian suit, custom-tailored by Marcus Romano, fit like it had been painted on. My hair, professionally styled at a salon in Grosse Pointe, had been cut and colored to hide the gray that stress had etched at my temples. 3 weeks with Detroit's most exclusive personal trainer had carved definition into muscles I'd forgotten I had. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the look in my eyes. For the first time in years I saw power there. Purpose. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Sterling. Everything is in place. The restaurant has been reserved. They'll arrive at 8 p.m. sharp. Are you ready for this? I adjusted my platinum cufflinks, each one worth more than my monthly salary at Ford, and typed back, I've been ready for 8 years. The Ocean Air Seafood Room was Detroit's most exclusive restaurant, the kind of place where CEOs made million-dollar deals over $200 steaks. I'd made the reservation under Theodore's name, knowing it would guarantee the best table in the house. Sarah and Richard were already seated when I arrived at 8:15 p.m., fashionably late, as Sterling had coached me. They sat at a corner table, Richard gesticulating wildly while Sarah laughed at something on her phone. She looked beautiful, I had to admit. Her blonde hair was freshly highlighted, and she wore a black dress that probably cost more than our old monthly grocery budget. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the candlelight, Richard's latest gift, no doubt. But as I watched them from across the restaurant, I felt nothing. No longing, no pain, no regret. Just a cold satisfaction that the woman who'd called me nothing was about to learn the true meaning of the word. I approached their table slowly, savoring each step. Hello, Sarah. She looked up from her phone, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, shock, and something that might have been fear. Marcus. Her voice was barely a whisper. What are you? How did you? Richard looked annoyed at the interruption. He was exactly what I'd expected. Soft around the middle, thinning hair compensated by an expensive watch, the kind of man who'd never worked a physical day in his life. Who's this, babe? Richard's tone was dismissive, proprietary. The way you'd talk about a stray dog that had wandered onto your property. This is my ex-husband. Sarah's eyes swept over my appearance, taking in every detail. Marcus, what are you doing here? And what? She gestured vaguely at my transformation. What happened to you? I smiled, not the desperate, pleading expression she remembered, but something cooler, more predatory. I received some interesting news recently, I said, settling into the empty chair at their table without invitation. About family I didn't know I had. Richard's jaw tightened. Look, buddy, this is a private dinner. Sarah's moved on, and frankly, you showing up here is pretty pathetic. Pathetic. I rolled the word around on my tongue like expensive wine. That's interesting, coming from a man who drives a leased BMW and lives in a house with 2 mortgages. Richard's face flushed red. Excuse me. Oh, I've done my research, Richard. Thompson Credit Report is fascinating reading. You owe $1.2 million across various creditors. Your dealerships are leveraged to the hilt, and you're about 6 months from bankruptcy. I leaned back in my chair. Quite the catch, Sarah. Sarah's eyes darted between us. How could you possibly know that? Money talks, sweetheart. And I've recently come into a position where I can afford to listen. The waiter approached our table. James, according to his name tag. Mr. Westbrook, he said with the kind of deference reserved for very special customers. Your usual table is ready whenever you'd like to move. Shall I bring the Dom Perignon while you finish with your guests? That would be perfect, James. The 1996, not the 2008. James nodded and disappeared. Sarah stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Your usual table. Marcus, what the hell is going on? I pulled out my phone and showed them a screenshot of my bank balance. 8 figures, followed by 6 more figures. Richard's fork clattered to his plate. Holy shit, Sarah breathed. That's not real. That can't be real. Theodore Westbrook, I said, watching her face carefully. Ring any bells? He was my great-uncle. Apparently he'd been watching me for years, impressed by my work ethic and dedication. He died 3 weeks ago and left me everything. I paused, letting that sink in. Everything, Sarah. $847 million in liquid assets. $312 million in real estate. Various business interests worth another $200 million or so. The color drained from her face. No, that's impossible. You're nobody. You work in a factory. Worked. Past tense. I signaled James, who appeared instantly. I'd like to buy this restaurant, please. Tonight. Certainly, sir. I'll have the manager contact the owners immediately. Sarah's mouth fell open. Richard looked like he was going to be sick. You can't just buy a restaurant like that, Richard stammered. That's not how things work. You're right, I said. Usually it takes lawyers and contracts and weeks of negotiation. But when you have enough money, people make exceptions. I turned to Sarah. Remember what you said about love not paying the bills? You were absolutely right. But apparently, neither does selling cars. James returned with a leather portfolio. The owners are prepared to accept your offer of $4.2 million, Mr. Westbrook. They can have the papers drawn up within the hour. Excellent. And James, I'd like to rename it, the Sarah, in honor of the woman who taught me that some things are more valuable than love. Sarah's hands were shaking now. Marcus, we need to talk. Privately. Do we? I stood up, straightening my jacket. Because I remember you being very clear about not wanting me to contact you. Something about me being poor and pathetic. I made a mistake, she whispered. I was confused, I was scared. You were honest, I interrupted. Brutally, refreshingly honest. You married me hoping I'd become someone else, and when that didn't happen, you found someone who already was. I glanced at Richard, whose face had gone from red to ashen. Or someone you thought was. I pulled out my wallet and dropped a business card on the table. That's my private attorney. If you want to contest the divorce settlement, you're welcome to try. Though I should mention that prenups become ironclad when you can afford the best lawyers in the country. Marcus, please. Sarah reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I love you. I always loved you. Sarah. My voice cut through her pleading like a blade. Do you remember what you told me the night you left? That you'd been lying for months because it was easier than dealing with me. She nodded miserably. Well, here's the truth you've been running from. You didn't leave me because I was poor. You left me because you're shallow. And shallow people don't suddenly develop depth when money appears. They just become expensive. I started to walk away, then turned back one final time. Oh, and Richard. That Porsche you bought her. I just purchased the dealership where you lease it. Consider this your 30-day notice. As I walked toward my new table, the best seat in my new restaurant, I heard Sarah burst into tears behind me. But I didn't turn around. James seated me by the window overlooking the Detroit River. The city sprawled out below me, no longer the prison of broken dreams it had been 3 weeks ago, but a kingdom of possibilities. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Westbrook, this is Jennifer, Sarah's friend. She asked me to contact you. She's devastated and wants to make things right. She realizes she made the biggest mistake of her life. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some mistakes don't get to be unmade. 3 months later, I was sitting in the boardroom of Westbrook Enterprises, the company I'd built from my inheritance, when my assistant buzzed in. Mr. Westbrook, there's a Sarah Thompson here to see you. She says it's urgent. I looked up from the acquisition reports I'd been reviewing. Sarah Thompson. She'd taken Richard's name after their quickie Vegas wedding 2 weeks ago, probably hoping his credit would improve hers. Send her in. She walked into my office like she was walking to her execution. Gone was the confident woman who'd demolished my world with casual cruelty. In her place was someone who looked smaller, diminished. The expensive clothes couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes. Marcus. Her voice was hoarse. Thank you for seeing me. You have 5 minutes. She sat down across from my desk, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolchild. Richard left me last week. The stress of bankruptcy, the investigations. He couldn't handle it. He blamed me for everything. I said nothing. I know you were behind it. The audit, the creditor investigations, the foreclosure on his house. You destroyed him. I didn't destroy anyone, Sarah. I simply stopped protecting him. There's a difference. Her laugh was bitter. You've changed. No, I said quietly. I've just stopped pretending to be less than I am to make other people comfortable. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Congratulations. It's not Richard's. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Whose is it? I don't know. The admission came out as a whisper. There were others. While I was with Richard. Men with money, men with power. I thought if I could find someone stable, someone who could provide. Someone who could save you from the consequences of your choices. She nodded miserably. I know how this sounds. I know what you think of me. But I'm broke, Marcus. Richard took everything when he left. I have nowhere to go. I stood up and walked to the window. Detroit stretched out below me, transformed in the past months by my investments. New construction, revitalized neighborhoods, people working again because I'd decided their city was worth saving. What do you want from me, Sarah? Help. The word was barely audible. A job, a loan, anything. Please. I turned back to face her. You told me once that love doesn't pay the bills. You were right. But you know what does pay the bills? Character. Integrity. The willingness to work for something instead of just taking it. I walked back to my desk and pulled out a business card. There's a women's shelter downtown that I fund. They have job training programs, childcare, housing assistance. Tell them I sent you. She took the card with shaking hands. That's it. That's all you're going to do. That's more than you did for me, Sarah. It's more than you deserve. She stood up slowly, defeat written in every line of her body. At the door, she turned back one last time. I really did love you, Marcus. In my own way. I know, I said. That's the saddest part of all. After she left, I sat alone in my office as the sun set over the city I was helping to rebuild. My phone showed 17 missed calls from various business partners, 3 acquisition offers, and a dinner invitation from the mayor. But for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again. Peace. Not because Sarah had suffered, though justice had its own satisfaction. Not because I'd proven her wrong about my worth, though that victory was sweet. But because I'd finally understood the difference between being valued and being valuable. Sarah had needed me to be someone else to love me. Richard had needed her to be someone else to want her. They were both still searching for external validation, for someone else to make them feel worthy. I'd learned to make myself worthy. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Westbrook, your 7 p.m. appointment is here. Ms. Rodriguez from the Literacy Foundation. Send her in. Maria Rodriguez was nothing like Sarah. Quiet, dedicated, passionate about helping Detroit's children learn to read. She wore simple clothes and drove a 10-year-old Honda, but when she talked about her work, her eyes lit up with a fire that no amount of money could buy. We'd been working together for 6 weeks, and I was starting to realize that everything I'd thought I knew about love had been wrong. Love wasn't supposed to diminish you. It was supposed to make you more than you were alone. As Maria walked into my office, smiling that genuine smile that never asked for anything except the chance to make the world a little better, I realized that Theodore's greatest gift hadn't been the money. It had been the time to become the man I was always meant to be. The man who was finally enough.